the station is interactive during 2009 and 2005. And he has been awarded by many professional Friday and he fellow of every Friday of National International Academy of National Academy of Business and Indian Analytical Friday is to practice democracy, advocate to the of the he has been working as a co-operating operation with people India and see and was leader member of the Indian distinction given over and he was the president of the technical every of Indian national across yes, and also I think leader. Yeah. So respect of very advanced सेंटर पर लगा 44 राइट 14 सेंटर need management award 9 I am Israel yes 40 बार ईस्ट एशिया लगा चार बार चार 16 बार 4 तो फिर हाइट में स्मार्ट पैनल लेगा तो हमने 8 डाला विंग पे 4 लाइन 2 पैनल इधर 2 पैनल इधर ना ठीक अब बताओ क्या बात और हाइट 9 पैनल स्विच करो लेक्चर पे स्विच करो सर वाली स्क्रीन पर सर आगे स्लाइड से हो जाए
Good afternoon, Dr. S.P. Agarwal and the President of the Indian Society of Remote Sensing, Dr. Prakash Chauhan, President ISG, all the distinguished members and participants of the annual symposium. And thank you, Praveen, for very generous introduction. I'll be speaking on use of Earth observation for terrestrial carbon cycle monitoring for progress towards net zero, because this is the word which is now being talked about so many times. So I have chosen this topic to put this old remote sensing and the large work into the current one. And as I will explain to you, the net zero is going to be the challenge for the upcoming generation. So India is supposed to reach that by 2070. So you now have 45 years of research available to monitor India's progress towards net zero. I would like to start with acknowledgements, because this work, I can't summarize all the research done by my colleagues, but it is necessary that some of the highlights of our publications of IS remote sensing are discussed. So I'm very grateful to the Indian Society, which has given me so much for so many years. So the current President, Executive Committee and the local organizing committee who have invited me to deliver this talk. My entire research career was built at Space Application Center, Ahmedabad, Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, Dehradun, National Remote Sensing Center at Hyderabad, and Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, Thiruvananthapuram. So I'm very grateful for that support. The carbon cycle project during 2007 to 16 was very, very generously funded by the ISRO Geosphere Biosphere program. So I think the cumulative expenditure on this project exceeds something somewhere between 35 to 40 crores. Currently, I am at National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIAS, which is at a position which is funded by Indira Gandhi Memorial Trust, and the funds from the trust allows me to hire my colleague researchers and pursue my independent research. At this moment, I would also like to acknowledge my alma maters. I studied in Delhi in a school called Andhra Education Society Higher Secondary School. Those of you are familiar with Delhi at ITO can see this school. I was at Hansraj College, Delhi University, and as was told by Praveen, I was for 7 years at Indian Agriculture Research Institute. The carbon cycle as a theme was introduced by my teacher, Professor Suresh Kumar Sinha. He attended the 1980 Villiers Conference on CO2, which is actually before all this issue of climate change, etc. So once he came from Villiers, he told me to all, in fact, many of our youngster students who were there, that this is going to be the research topic for future, and as plant physiologists, we should work it. So unfortunately, I did start working on carbon cycle, but my colleague, Dr. Shailesh Nayak, whom I think you are all familiar with, and me, we decided that every Saturday, he is a geologist, I am a botanist, that every Saturday when we will finish the Monday to Friday our projects, I was working in crop forecasting, we will meet and try to compile the carbon cycle, the biogeochemical carbon cycle of India. And this is our first publication, which came in 1993. So 31 years after that, I think I'm very happy. So I would also acknowledge Dr. Shailesh Nayak, who sort of nurtured this activity. But suppose when we want to discuss the carbon dioxide, carbon cycle, and the warming of the earth, it is very important to just remember Arrhenius. Already in the previous 50 to 60 years, many scientists of that era, Langley, Fourier, Tyndall, and Engstrom, they were all talking of carbonic acid and its relation to temperature. But he actually used physical chemistry principle to say that if atmospheric carbon dioxide increases, there will be an increase in surface temperature, right? And he wrote in 1896 a very important paper on the influence of carbonic acid in the air upon the temperature of the ground. This was published by the Philosophical Magazine of London, Edinburgh, and Dublin in volume 41. Right? Those of you interested in history should look at it. But the real impetus came in 1957. So post Second World War, the scientists wanted to do international work. And then they decided, if you want to do Earth, it is important to understand the Earth as a system. So International Geophysical Year, IGY, the first one was set up in 1957. And as part of the IGY, a young chemical researcher called Charles P. Keeling, he was provided funds. He actually had really developed very, very accurate measurement of carbon dioxide in the air. When you measure carbon dioxide in the air, it is important to measure in dry air. Otherwise, your numbers will vary because of the variation in the H2O water vapor molecule. So this is the dry molar CO2. So what he did was is a foresight. Even when you know what to measure, you should also be very clear where to measure. So his choice of the place to measure, if you see in the cornermost, he traveled 1,000 kilometers west of the US West Coast into Hawaii. And within Hawaii, which has so many islands, he chose a volcanic island with no vegetation. And from there, I have the pictures and the current state of Mauna Loa. So this is the famous Mauna Loa, and he started measuring the carbon dioxide there. And from this carbon dioxide measurement has come the most widely used and circulated curve, which is what you see as the carbon dioxide concentration from 1957 to 2023, the annual CO2 as well as this increase. This Mauna Loa curve is also called the Keeling in honor of Dr. Charles D. Keeling. Later on, scientists found out that this increase is fine because we are only talking of 5 to 6 decades. But if you go to Antarctica and take out the ice core and measure the air which is trapped in the bubbles of ice which fell up to 700,000 years ago, there is Thank you. Yeah, so there have been increases in the CO2 and dip, which corresponds to the ice ages and warming cycle. But what you will see, the closest to your right on the lower panel is this current increase is so much that it has not been there in almost like a past 800,000 years. So this is the anthropogenic CO2, and this increase started in 1860s after the industrialization, and this is likely to cause very catastrophic warming, right? So that increase is due to we are mining the carbon in the fossil fuel and releasing in the atmosphere. The earth does not have the capacity to absorb this much carbon. So you then enter into what is called a short-term carbon cycle, where from the atmosphere, in the red what you see is the release, and then from there plants take through photosynthesis, then it goes to the soil, and then it goes to the reservoirs, back to the ocean. 90% more carbon is actually in the ocean, but it is stable. So this cycle is still run from yearly to decade scale. There is a geological life carbon cycle which runs at a million scale, but we will not be interested for that in the moment. So what basically happened was from Arrhenius to the current model, everybody predicts the earth is warming, and we know it is not good for the climate system. So the entire community as a multilateral organization, they have set up climate treaties. The three important treaties are United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, popularly known as UNFCCC. The UNFCCC's technical work is done by IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They want to work, to avoid the inconsequent causes of this CO2 increase. The Kyoto Protocol, which was the conference in Japan in 1997, they said that we will restrict by 2007 the emissions by the Annex 1 countries, which were the developed countries. Kyoto Protocol failed. Then came the Paris Agreement 2015. The Paris Agreement said that by 2020, we will have in vogue what is called NDC, nationally determined the contributions. Unfortunately, Paris talked of 1.5 degrees at NDC. It failed. This month or the last month in the end at Baku, the 29th Conference of Parties, 29th COP, the agenda of this COP was to really find out the finance to do this, and what was offered was 300 billion, and that too starting from 30 onward. And India and the group of developing nations, they said we require 1.3 trillion now, and consequently it should increase. So I am not sure whether the Baku will have any outcome. But if we go back to science and leave the politics, the Working Group 1 report of the assessment number 6 of IPCC said the increase in global temperature is 1.07, and this is proportional to the global cumulative emission. This sentence is very important. Many models have shown you add all emissions and you put a cumulative curve. It very closely follows the rising temperature, even given the interannual variation, given the El Nino and La Nina, all whatever. But this positive trend is very there. So what they say is the limit to increase the global temperature since pre-industrial, we must stay within the global carbon budget. And the global carbon budget, they set at 1.5 degrees, which is now at 500 gigatons CO2. But unfortunately, the 500 gigatons CO2 is being used more by developed nations. Now, what has happened since 1991? India has become the fourth largest emitter of CO2. We all are already the fourth largest uh, consumer economy. We also are the highest number of population. But cumulative emission, which is like more than 60% between 1860 and 1990, they were all done by developed nations. So one of the very important terms in the negotiation is what is called common but differentiated emission, CBDR. So because of this, there is on paper a very nice, agreement that we all are responsible. We will work towards it, and there is a differentiated responsibility. But in practice, does not happen. So now, from Paris onward, the idea was that we have to reduce the emission to 45% below 2010 emission by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So how do you get net zero? It means your emissions and your uptake must balance. But who will now measure? How will you compare nations? And whether there will be transparency? That is where the remote sensing comes in. In the international governance, monitoring, and transparency, the satellite is the only tool which is available. But I will only say that the mitigation actions include the second line, which is called absorption by sink, forest, ocean, and the soil are the three very large sink which can absorb CO2. But now then the challenge gets transformed. How do you quantify this CO2 and how do you detect the increase, which can be very, very small percentage? It can be below 1% also. So this is the challenge which the current remote sensing techniques are not able to meet. I'm telling you the answer for my next 20-30 slide. So that is the challenge before the entire young community. But still going to the story, let us just for a minute talk of the COP26. COP26 happened at Glasgow. So Barack Obama got a Nobel Prize. Then he came to Glasgow and said US will be the leader for climate action. Of course, nothing has happened since then. Then the Indian Prime Minister also went there because four major producers got together and created what is called a paper on climate action. So what he talked was, our Prime Minister, Honorable Mr. Modi, talked of called Panch Mitra. What was the Panch Mitra? India will increase the non-fossil energy capacity by 500 gigawatt. At that time, we were less than almost like 23 gigawatt only. So he was talking of 50 times more. India will meet 50% of its energy requirement by renewable non-fossil by 2030. We are way behind the schedule, both because that much energy is not needed in the day, nor can be produced, and our nuclear capacity is below. Third, we will reduce the projected carbon emission by 1 billion ton from now to 2030. It hasn't happened. We do not foresee the 1 billion ton absorption. Fourth, our carbon intensity. The carbon intensity is as your GDP increases, you have to increase your energy use. So the amount of carbon dioxide released per dollar of the increase in GDP is the intensity. So the idea was not to increase the overall carbon, but the intensity of carbon emission by India by 45%. So it means we will be more efficient in burning carbon. And they also said we didn't agree to 2040. China projected 2050, but India said we are far behind the development of all other major economies and we will reach net zero only by 2070. So we are in now at the threshold of 25. So that almost now gives us 45 years to monitor the changes in the carbon pools, right? Interestingly, what happened was, okay, so this is the strategy. We can skip it. Now, governments have to report to the UNFFC, all the signatories, what are they doing and what is their carbon. So these are the various reports. And the last report, I'll just show you two things. We have to measure carbon dioxide from the forest land, from cropland, grassland, settlements, wetland, and other land. India actually does not use what is called a tier 3. A tier 3 approach means that you will spatially disaggregate and then estimate carbon. But India still uses one national number for each national activity, but India derived number. The tier 1 is the IPCC suggests some default number, you simply do a algebra. Unfortunately, we are stuck in tier 2 for past 15 years and we really are not in tier 3. So our research from 2007 onward at IIRS, NRSC, more IST and currently at NIAS is on developing a tier 3 spatial modeling of carbon dioxide. Also, what they said was that if you see in blue, the land use change and forest are a net sink in India. While 94, it was estimated as 14 million ton CO2 equivalent emission. But from 2000 to now, it is between 200 to 485 million ton carbon dioxide equivalent absorption. So the government says we are absorbing and we have a tier 2 method. So it is something like, saying that I shot an arrow, it fell somewhere, where I don't know. So now the question comes, everybody now computes potential carbon absorption, but you can't do actual carbon absorption unless you do remote sensing. So what we did was, you need to understand the tools. So the tools of the observations are atmospheric CO2. We have Mahesh Shifi is there, Mahesh Patankoti. He is running the longest FTIR observations. A field inventory, our team at IIRS, along with almost 60 collaborators, is the only team which developed India-wide soil samples and the tree biomass measurement entire India by common protocol in a 2-year time frame. Before that and after that is not done, and we only rely on either FSI or NBSS LUP, right? We also established flux towers. At that time, there were not many functioning. So my friends Kushwa Patel, we established flux towers at Haldwani, at Barkot. Then later on from Hyderabad, we put them in the Sundarban, Boni camp, also and Betul in the team. I think Dr. Suraj Reddy, if he's there, you can talk to him. After observations, you require models, gross primary productivity, net primary productivity, crop models, dynamic vegetation models, earth system models, and the integrated impact analysis model. Then only you would know. And you need remote sensing. I have specifically used the word land trajectory. See, the point is whenever you take 2-time data, you say land cover has changed. But then this land cover, land change is a continuous process. It will go on happening next 10 years again, it will change. So what we need to look at is not between two periods, but decadal to century scale land trajectories. Not only the forest change, but the type of vegetation changes. So unfortunately, for FSI, anything tree is a forest cover divided into three categories: very dense, and open. They don't bother what type of structure and functioning it is there. We have tried to bring it there, and then they only report, if you see the FSI and the newspapers, they say Indian forest increased by this much. So every time there is a small increase. But we want to understand the dynamics. It means the losses in space and gains in space, and then very large number of geophysical parameter. Finally, a net result of the atmospheric CO2. Okay, so what are your actual measures are a data model fusion, inversion, and long-term policy and action. And why it is pertinent? Because we are calling our symposium as sustainable action. So unless you develop sustainable policies, there will be no sustainable action. So this is a diagram of what happens on ground and what on the top of what type of models you use. Your bookkeeping models are like algebraic equation, DGBM are spatial simulation model, and then you have to put them together and come from nation up to globe, one carbon, net carbon emission and our progress to zero. So there were many questions. So in 2007, we started National Carbon Project. So we measured the biomass, we put up flux towers, also the soil carbon. I will skip. And the flux, the cycle what we are using is the first uptake is the gross primary production, minus the respiration is the net primary production. And then after the litter fall and the annual cycle, the growth is the net ecosystem productivity. After burning, eating, etc., what remains in the total biosphere is net biome productivity. So this cannot be done unless we have the GPP first. In fact, the first 30 years of remote sensing, people went on developing models for NPP. Then they realized it is not worthwhile. One has to develop model for GPP, and NPP is a plant control function and adecovariance flux towers. I'll just show you. So flux tower for youngsters is a very nice instrument. You put up, measure the CO2 without disturbing the vegetation in X, Y, Z in the open loop, but your measurement rate is 20 hertz. It means you measure 20 times the CO2 in a second. So whenever there is an eddy, wind rises up, there will be a dip in the day and rise in the night, because air is dynamic and eddies go on moving. So from this dip, which is of the order of 1/20th of a second, you actually compute the difference in the concentration above the canopy and in the canopy. So this gives you the differential, and you can apply gas laws to compute the fluxes. Algebra and equation is there. So this is a teak forest, and you can see our measurement, multi-year measurement. You can see Dr. Suraj Reddy and Dr. Jha, and you can see the monsoon, after monsoon, the uptake, and then pre-summer, the release, right? And then, so basically, the GPP is of the order of 33 tons per hectare, but there is a respiration and decomposition of 28 tons per hectare per year, giving rise to net carbon accumulation, NEP, of 5 tons per year, right? Similarly, our 6-7 sites, this is the mangrove in Sundarban, also multi-year data. Because you are at coast and there is no seasonality, and the numbers are also slightly less. Now, if that much is happening, what is the status of India? If you just put various areas, FSI numbers, you all know, the area goes on increasing. But FSI started doing only since 1993. Our idea was to start at least 8 decades. So we put up this data along with our colleague Sudhakar Reddy, and we showed that what has been in last 8 decades the forest area change in each grid cell, right? Then we further converted into the actual deforestation is removal of a forest and converting to other cropland. So most of the newspaper reports are actually on cutting of a tree. Whether tree is coming there back or not, they don't monitor, which is what we did. So what we then tried to do was look at all the official approvals of land diversion and look at 30-meter, all the trees cut area and try to balance. Also use the FSI change matrix between two cycles to show that there has been almost like every year 240,000 hectares of tree loss where it is happening. Then we put together a data set which then said in each 1 kilometer grid what fraction of the tree and forest is lost and in which grid within this period of 19 years where new plantations have been done. Now we know the loss locations and gain areas, the area, but for each vegetation type there is a different growth rate. I also showed you the measurement. That is where we are currently stuck at. So we tried to develop a biomass measurement. Biomass measurement is very tricky. We created a first 250-meter biomass map by fusing many sensors and doing machine learning, right? So this is the first. And then we also showed that the linearity of our biomass is much better than any other. Now there are many global biomass estimates. People happily use them. We used the latest global biomass estimate spatial map and compared it with plus minus 1 year of India's our own measurement. You can see there is a very, very strong underestimation. So now we know that there are gain areas, loss areas, it's a 8 decade, and the vegetation types do not remain the same even when they come. So I'll show you just an example of Tripura, which in 1991 had only 6,000 acres of rubber. Now by 2017, it already had 117,000 of acres of rubber, and we converted. Now you know the biomass is a function of age. You can't multiply area by mean biomass. For each age, there is a different biomass. So this paper was published. Now, we now know a large area of GPP, NPP, and lot of litter fall. So what happens? This litter fall has to be spatially mapped. So we worked on the machine learning models to really spatially predict the litter fall. This was done by my colleagues of NIAS. We also then mapped the biomass change with the area change, right? So we can skip. Now, most of the soil scientists take soil order, suborder, and have a mean carbon. But unfortunately, this approach gives you static pool, and we know soil organic carbon is heavily dependent on that. So as part of NCP, almost like 2,000 points with a CHN analyzer, we measured the organic carbon and produced the India's first 250-meter the soil organic and inorganic carbon map. Now this map is single time, so now we are moving in two directions. The current our work relates to if the land use changes, how the machine models will work the change. So what we interestingly found is Kerala is the only state in the country which has 70% area under tree cover, 60% of the tree cover is plantation, and between 95 and now, 40% of the rice area is actually converted into plantation. So you have loss of agricultural land. Now everybody says plant more trees. It will give more CO2 in the soil. But as it happened in our inadvertent natural experiment in Kerala, so when we mapped by this approach and we found that the gain over almost like 30 years is less than 7 teragram. So in 200 teragram, 7 teragram is less than 3%, right? So now the soil carbon is the biggest issue. On y-axis, I have the area under the control. X-axis is the rate at which it can absorb. So now, unless remote sensing can resolve these practices, you would not be able to resolve the soil organic carbon. But what we did, my colleague Dr. Ravindra Naik may be here, he ran a global model, the CASA model for 2 decades plus, and in that he showed that there are areas where carbon would have accumulated, right? So this is between 2008 to 15 using a terrestrial ecosystem model. So we now have to match the land use change, the model, and the observation in a data model fusion, right? Now everything is land use change, but what has happened? The international community thought 1996 that we only have land use change and forestry. Then they realized by 2003 that it is land use change and forestry. Then they realized more management of land is in agriculture. Again, the IPCC guidelines were revised to create FOU. Now, what has happened? If you look at this, we tried to map the Northeast, the tea gardens. In fact, we mapped between 1875 to that. I show you a graphic of 1913. So there are areas where forest, secondary forest is cut, converted into tea. Then there the tourism, etc. They get converted into habitation with homestead, and then new areas are then cleared for tea. So we try to map this cycle, and we are in the process of converting into carbon. Another thing which I think for sustainability is most important is conversion of land use into built up area. So very currently we are working on the urbanization in India over 35 years. I just share some of the unpublished results. So we have used a proxy, the impervious land, and every 5 year entire India and converted into fraction of a grid. So now roughly we know which are the grid where the agriculture land has now become impervious. Not only that, if we see what was the original land use, actually 82% of this land use was agriculture, 5% shrubland, 4% plantation, and others are the other category of area. Now, so this allows us to take the change and its capacity to absorb carbon. Now, let us say our same model. So what we did was we used the soil health card. So India has issued 140 million farmers the soil health card. This is based on more than 40 million of the actual measurement. So we really did a big data analysis and converted them into actual surface soil organic carbon map at 500-meter resolution. We using that and the FAO assessment to really say this conversion from agriculture to impervious urbanization, how much CO2 emissions would have been there. Our estimate, I say, is only 17 or 18 teragram, which is an underestimate, but okay. Secondly, the agriculture, we are going on adding fertilizer irrigation, which is leading to the CO2. So the GPP is increasing. We created a GPP data set and we have released it for open use. And then we have computed what percent of the land the GPP in 20 years has increased and in what percent of the land GPP is decreasing. This is the work which was done by my PhD student, Dr. Abha Chabra, for her PhD. We mapped the forest conversion and the carbon emission and the role of the 1980 Supreme Court order to stop the deforestation, right? So this is our current understanding of 160-year plus of the deforestation and carbon release. The three approaches, OSCAR is a a simplified DGVM. H2C is a model of the bookkeeping model, and blue is bookkeeping with the land use taken from the Hadley cell. So roughly, you can say only the H2UC says India is absorbing carbon dioxide. Other two models are not. So the divergence between different modeling approaches needs to be done. I think I am done with, except that I just could show you the variability. And the latest research which has happened, this is a paper which came 2 months ago. People have used the vegetation cover fraction, and then for each pixel over 2 decades computed the maximum water potential, the water stress. And then if you see the diagram, this is the variability in the tree fraction. That if you put a curve on the top, that is potential. If you put it to the center, this is realized. And then you have poor. So what the authors have done is they have removed agriculture land, taken areas with more than 1200 millimeter rainfall happens over non-agriculture land, and then try to compute where can we accumulate carbon and what would be the carbon rate. I think at this stage, I will just show you the last result, which is by my colleague, Ravindra Nayak. So the satellites now can measure the CO2. Now, if you have the columnar CO2 and you know what is the spatial map of emission, right, due to various factors such as anthropogenic, terrestrial, and ocean. So what is happening is the movement of these air masses. So the difference between the movement of the air masses and the observation, you can do an inverse modeling to compute what has been. So our study indicated that net land uptake is of the order in the northern India grid of 150 teragram and southern grid as 60 teragram. There are variations amongst all results and various, because this method is prone to substantial errors because of the changes in the fields, as well as how accurate the atmospheric dynamics and how many measurements are captured. Thank you very much. I have tried to convey why we should do net zero, what are the current best approaches, and why we still cannot really conclusively say where how much carbon is accumulating. Thank you very much.
The emphasis is more on given to than on methane. Methane is more greenhouse gas. The atmosphere is biased towards carbon dioxide.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. P.P. Rao. The emphasis on methane is only because methane have three main sources: paddy, which is how to have an agricultural practice of reducing by intermittent flooding from paddy. The second one is the livestock and fugitive methane from the transport and the landfills. So there, the solution is the energy solution. You convert the methane extracted into a energy. And the third methane, right, which basically happens are the volcanic, small burning, etc., which at the moment is too diffuse. So that is why trying to methane number, if you really see, is of the order of 1700 ppb. The measurements by remote sensing are only giving what are called dense methane sources, not the diffused methane, right? So at the moment, methane will continue to be an action of energy transformation and conservation, not of remote sensing.
Sir, thank you for such a nice and informative talk. So I have wanted to know your point of view. That what is your vision that India will have satellite which can measure CO2 and how it would resolve such kind of uncertainty?
Yeah, thank you, RP. So this idea is to provoke me to say something, right? Good. So the first thing is we must measure our CO2. The second important point is the CO2 measurement as of now are too few, broad 10 kilometer, and they are not available every day or etc. There is a large amount of interpolation, etc. Secondly, as the CO2 will increase, we are already at 421 parts per million by volume. There will be what is called a rectilinear effect. The CO2, increases. It can be higher in somewhere in between and then dip. The columnar total are not able to show the vertical distribution near Earth, right? Because this measurement is below the boundary layer, just above the boundary layer, because of the low transfer rate, there is slightly less CO2, right? So remote sensing should be sounding to get the vertical distribution also. So then I am sure we will be able to do. And why we should do, third question is the ISRO's experience in running the megatropics, which was the precursor to the global precipitation mission. It gave very good understanding, right? So these are the three reasons. Fourthly, it is likely that from simple optical absorption, we may have better and more sensors, including lidars, etc., which may measure carbon dioxide. Incidentally, we really do not have a long-term ground measurement series. The longest one was started by Bhatta in PRL. That was at Cape Rama. He used to send samples to Australia. Then I think Mahesh has the longest series, which we started in NRSC. The IMD's Rani Chauri station has just started. The Indian Institute of Astrophysics at Handling, through the what is called the CMAX earlier, it used to call their Swati started some measurement, but they are I think 3-4 years only. So you need measurement over India. You need precise measurement. You need to supplement by the satellite retrieval. And incidentally, you must have more FTIR. Mahesh runs one where he can measure by the sunlight absorption the columnar gases. We need more observations. That was the starting point. And the answer is still saying we need more observations.
Sir, excellent presentation. In fact, very illustrative presentation. Question, you have started this vegetation carbon biomass estimation and the soil carbon biomass estimation 2007. What is that in the current scenario? Because that earlier people have
I understood, Dr. TPC. You yourself were our team member. In fact, there were 62 universities which participated. I am not sure, unless Prakash corrects me, that anybody is putting that effort and ISRO is putting that much money. We almost spent 11 crores in so many PhDs were produced and so much data came. We need to have a improved protocol. We need to find money. We need to collaborate. Till that money is not there, we can still collaborate, but that will not give a national snapshot the way it was done in NCP. NCP remains a unique experiment, which I and my all colleagues are very proud of.
Very nice. Then India is surrounded by oceans from three sides, like that. So, what is the role of ocean in the carbon uptake and intake?
Okay. So, what happens? The oceanic uptake is a function of the bicarbonate and the boron plus the wind and salinity. Now, this actually continuously goes on mixing. is more like a physical chemistry. You can work it out, but then the spatial variability is not large. There is a variability with wind and the seasonality. Secondly, you do not really have actions. There were experiments to spray iron and enhance the phytoplankton. I don't think there is much success. So since there will be no intervention and oceans as a whole are sink, and the sink capacity as of now is almost fixed, that they use from the C-14, which was emitted from the atomic bomb emission. So that uptake of C-14 already is acting as a tracer. So because of this type of things, and most of the cold water sinks and then it goes deep into the ocean conveyor belt, right? But what we know is the ocean heat content is rising. We also know the acidification. So then there are computational models how it will impact not only the exoskeleton dissolution, also the uptake. So there is a bunch of things, but it is not something which I can or a nation can do for next 3 years to have permanent storage. So it's a very, very large reservoir, too much inertia and not under the control, under more atmosphere dynamics and other factors. I think that could be the reason.
So maybe